Well, everyone, it is our final day of our summer training series. Thank you to everyone for participating. And one thing Jess and Tara would tell you is that how much I have, when I get off these calls every Tuesday, I'm kind of like, oh, it's so nice how much everyone participates and contributes to the discussion. And that just makes my job a lot easier and more fun to have these conversations with all of you. So it's our last day, day 12, and we are going to do some action planning and just settle up with any questions or lingering thoughts. So we'll open with that. Does anyone, as you've thought over the last couple of months, questions, thoughts that have occurred to you, things like that, that you want to share or that you want to revisit before we get into action planning? All right, well, we're ready to rock and roll then. So the action plan document is shared in handouts on Google Classroom, so you're welcome to download it if you want to have a hard copy later on or something like that. It would be helpful if you have like a piece of scrap paper, because there is something about the muscle memory, right, of kind of actually writing something down, even if you don't keep a hold of that piece of paper, just going through the exercise, but you don't need it. We're just going to be sharing out loud. And I definitely want to hear from everyone. So we'll kind of go around the screen. And if you remember last week, we went through that self-assessment tool with that inventory where you were just kind of asking yourself questions and rating yourself. And you all shared kind of those top 2 items that you wanted to work on, or at least to be more intentional about from that self-assessment tool. So, when you're thinking about those things, think about parts of the training series that maybe was new information for you. And so have all of those things in mind while you're thinking about your own action plan. And, I know a lot of you have varying years of experience working in CASA or just working in systems that are maybe adjacent or within the child welfare system. And I know I've been working in child welfare for a long time, and it's easy to kind of keep doing things the way that we've always done them because that's just the way it is. So I encourage all of you to challenge that a little bit, just within yourself even. And, sometimes we come into meetings or we come into, procedures or processes that we work with the young people that we serve. And we come at it from the perspective of, oh, well, it'd be great if we could try it this way, but this is the way it happens. I'm just one person. I don't know how effective I can really be at changing things or moving that needle in any significant way. And so we just kind of don't do it, right? We're just kind of disappointed. So I encourage everyone to think about what are those small things that you can do right now. What are those kind of bigger systems level conversations that need to happen? And then, what are just process things that need to happen? A lot of times we do a process in child welfare just because it's kind of the way it's been indoctrinated, but it's not necessarily rooted in law or policy. It's just the way that we've kind of always done it. An example in our county here in Athens, there is kind of this tendency when a disruption happens, like a placement disruption, things move really, really fast. A lot of times it's just, the steps are find a new placement, make this happen, tell who needs to be told, do the legal paperwork, all of that. And there are times where we can actually slow that crisis down. We could actually maybe write the narrative, so when I think I talked about the narratives that kind of get shared when there's a search for new placement, right? There's kind of the summary of this child, their needs, whatever, that gets, kind of shared as someone sitting down trying to find a new placement, placement option. What if instead of waiting until we have a crisis, to write those narratives, where we're writing them maybe through the reflection of the caregiver fatigue. Because remember, that's one of the things we talked about. A lot of times these narratives are written with that kind of caregiver lens. And what if we didn't write them during the crisis? What if we already had those working narratives developed as a team and they kind of got updated maybe at every case review that we have? Why do we wait until we were at a crisis place to start thinking about if we needed to very quickly find a service, find a placement, whatever it is for this young person, kind of having that narrative built already. And that way it can be kind of a living document that changes as that child's needs change. So it's just one little thing. That's a process that could be changed, here locally in the work, where I work, that, there's no reason that we couldn't do it that way. It's just that we've never done it that way before. So just a small example of, we don't necessarily have to rewrite all of child welfare policy or law. And we can look at what we can make a difference in. So I've had these up on the screen and I'm sure you're all starting to think about them. So let's hear, I'd love to hear from one or two of you on, as a result of this training, I have acquired the following new knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So as you've thought about this training, if you've thought about this series, what are some of the highlights? And I invite you to unmute and share, or feel free to share in the chat box.
And this is Frankie. In the past, when I hear the term risk taking, there's that negative connotation to it, right? But what I've learned, and I know that I knew this, but I just still made it negative when I would talk about it, is that there are positive risk-taking behaviors that teenagers should do, and so I need to bring that to the table.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I know somehow we think of the word risk and it sounds very, very scary because we've attached that emotion to it. So yeah, great point, Frankie.
Jenny, I guess what I'm thinking, some of the things I didn't really I wasn't aware of or thinking about in the same terms as is really thinking about, especially these teens who they don't have room for mistakes. When people see a child in the system make mistakes, they view it as, well, they're just bad kids. And I think really trying to understand that some of the things they're doing are no different than normal teens, and try and view it from that perspective. And the other thing is really working hard, if I have a team, to find ways to get them involved socially, to help them gain positive experiences with other youth. Maybe one of the things that stands with, I remember most, is talking about maybe, and I can't remember who mentioned this, but talking about letting them act as a tutor so that they gain some leadership experience from that. And then I think the third thing is really the whole circle of support thing, and the brain development not really settling in until age of 26. It explains a lot. So I think those are some of the key takeaways that I've got from this that I think will help me as I deal with the older youth.
Great. Thank you, Pat, for sharing. And the cool thing is, as we're, kind of everyone's sharing and talking about kind of their highlights or key takeaways, is that it might remind you of, oh yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember that breakout room, and, reroute you down in some of those new concepts as well. And sometimes it's just looking at something you already knew from a little bit different angle. So awesome. I'm going to share from the chat box. Deb shares working through consequences. Good one. Debbie says one of her goals is to listen more and really hear what they are saying, and to make the youth more part of the decision making. Stephanie shares how to assist youth to build relationships and assist them to overcome the stigma of being in someone else's home. And then we have the focus of knowing that it is okay and encouraged to be a part of the conversation. I like knowing that I do not need to tell them what is going to happen, rather asking them for their input. It takes the guesswork out of what they may want. Yeah, that's a good perspective shift there. Anyone else want to share? Okay. So I know I think the slide says supervisor, but it could be with people within your CASA network, with the teams that you work on. So if you were to think about, your own strengths in the work that you do with young people, and what are some of those things that you're still kind of, oh yeah, I still want to work on this. Think about those things. What strengths do you bring to the table to be able to put this work into action? So thinking about the stuff that's already innate within you. Does anyone want to share like a skill that they have, or just kind of a more personal or professional strength that they think will lend them an advantage and kind of deploying some of the concepts from this training?
I think one of my positives is that I'm not afraid to be the lone voice, the dissenting voice at the table in order that a child's needs get met.
Yeah, that's a good one to have, as kind of being willing to swim upstream when needed. I always think of that term. A few years ago, one of our CASA volunteers was named CASA Volunteer of the Year. And in the press release that we prepared on it, I got a quote from our late Judge Stewart. And his quote was, "Suzanne's not afraid to swim upstream if it means doing what's right for a child." So I always think of that, sometimes you have to do that. Julie shares in chat that she's a good listener. I agree. And she's able to meet them where they are. Anyone else want to share?
Jenny, I kind of have a personal insight, I guess. I've kind of lived this dream. Excuse me. My son flipped the teenage switch, I guess, for lack of a better word, when he started high school, and he was terrible. I mean, he was absolutely terrible. He wouldn't go to school. He was skipping school. He pulled a gun on his dad. He spent some time in a juvenile detention facility in Institute, West Virginia. It was bad. It was really, really bad. So they diagnosed him with bipolar, and they gave him pills, and he come home, and then come to find out he was spitting his pills out at our sidewalk, kind of made an L to the driveway. And he was spitting the pills out at the end of the sidewalk, and nobody really realized it until I dropped something, went to work one morning and said, what is this? Well, it was his pills. The day report had to be involved. He stayed in the court system till he was 18. Day report literally several times had to come and pull him out of my house. And I learned with that nobody else was going to advocate for him but me. I was, mother or not, nobody else was going to advocate for him. Nobody would offer to do a 504 plan for him. So, the squeaky wheel, well, I started squeaking really, really loud. And I sometimes use those skills with other kids that I help through CASA that, listen, I've lived this dream. We can get through this. It can be done. I promise. I've done it. I've lived the dream, wrote the book, wore the t-shirt, the whole 9 yards. And I think that helps build that initial relationship and that trust. And I use that a lot with my older youth that, I hear you. I know you're angry. Life sucks right now. I completely understand. But listen to this story. And if I overcome this and my son overcomes that, and he's a functioning member of society, he works construction and makes really good money now. You would never know that was the same kid that broke my tailbone in 2 places. and broke 3 of my toes. And I was so ashamed that I didn't want to tell anybody.
Well, Stephanie, thank you for sharing. And I'm sorry that you had those experiences, but I'm glad to hear that your son seems to be doing better now. And thank you for sharing that kind of different perspective to the conversation. Check in the chat box here. I see Kara shares that her strengths include flexibility and openness, and a need is to be more purposeful in my questioning or to have a bit more direction and intentionality as an advocate. Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. Omni shares, as a high school educator, I spend my day empowering teens to take control of their education, life, and choices. Great. All right, well, thanks everyone. Moving on to our third kind of question here. So as you think about the last 12 weeks that we've spent together, what are just some of the, and some of you have already shared these things, but what are some new things that you're going to try, or things that you have felt validated in and you're going to keep doing them because you got some affirmation that you were doing them? Or maybe you're going to inject some of the brain science that we talked about into that work, or just even maybe an internal bias or language or anything like that, that you're just going to be a little more mindful of. Does anyone want to share theirs? For me, I think I already told you that I have to work really hard not to say kiddo and buddy. So that's something I'm always working on. Anyone else want to share theirs?
I have to work really hard to not say dude, especially if it's a girl, you know, I'm just like, dude, come on, you know, and then I'm like, oh, that was a girl. So I try really hard to not say dude. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah, we all have that. I've been trying not to use gendered language. So saying guys, which is, you know, kind of just socially a way of saying what I mean is like you all, I'm talking to a group of people, but I have to catch myself all the time. Anyone else have any that they want to share? Any things that they're going to be a little more intentional about?
I think like, well, I know the whole idea that we've been talking about in almost every session of changing the narrative has especially stood out to me. Ever since I even started joining in on CASA from the very beginning trainings, you know, I think I've had to do a lot of work over the past couple of years working on my own intrinsic bias that I didn't realize existed until we started talking about it. And when in other conversations that I've had with people, it seems like it kind of a light bulb clicks across the board when we discuss how the things that quote unquote normal teenagers who aren't in foster care, they're normal, everyday, risk-taking kinds of behaviors, and the way that it's totally different for youth in foster care. That has been, above all, so eye-opening to me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Kara. Out in the chat, caught myself trying not to interrupt this weekend. That's what I said I was going to work on last week, so I'm going to continue to work on that. Yeah, I think a lot of us, right, that I think I was joking last week that we might typecast CASA volunteers. We look for people with really good problem solving skills because we all want to jump in and fix things and think of 10 different solutions because we just want to help. And so sometimes it can be hard to sit back and kind of understand the value of the process of wrestling with things, particularly for teens, as we're building brains. So, you know, everything we do when we're working with teens has the potential to, you know, have a positive, negative, or neutral impact on their brain development. So taking advantage of those opportunities for positive brain development when we see them. Absolutely. I also, one thing I'll share with you, as you all have probably guessed, I sometimes find myself feeling a little fierce on behalf of the teenagers that I work with that are on my caseload. And a lot of times I tend to, because I think to Kara's point, that changing the narrative kind of leaning that I recognize within myself, I sometimes jump to defend and maybe even rationalize the behavior of some of my teenage clients a little prematurely without talking to them first and kind of sitting back for a second and trying to understand things, because I find myself feeling nervous that they're going to get wrapped up in this bias and that decisions are going to be made. So I oftentimes find myself going in the other direction, whereas what I really need to do is slow down and ask a lot of questions and listen a lot, instead of pre-assuming that that the young person is going to get wrapped up in some kind of decision train that hasn't even started yet. So I recognize that in myself, and probably just, some of that type A type stuff coming out. Debbie shares that she's going to use the brain frames, what a young person says and what they might mean, and really kind of make you think about those conversations. So I shared, I think, 5 different brain frames on the Google Classroom. Those are all from the Casey Foundation. I think they are excellent. They are just one-page, kind of graphically oriented documents that are just open. Feel free to share them with others, but I really like those. I think I shared all 5 of them. I really like them as well. They're very practical, great ways to start conversations, especially when you're feeling a little stuck, right? I know we've had a lot of chatting about building meaningful and authentic partnerships with young people, right? Remember how we were talking about moving from object to recipient to partner. And there's some great tips on the Google Classroom for wrapping our heads around that partnering activity. Okay, so as we've gone through this training, I know a number of you have shared books you've read, articles, TED Talks. So I wanted to share a couple. These are probably pretty familiar to you. They're pretty widely circulated books, but I wanted to share 4 books that align with a lot of what we were talking about. The one book I really like is The Body Keeps the Score. I know we have a couple of copies of it in our office if anyone ever wants to borrow it. And that's the one really talking about the impact to biology that trauma, particularly chronic trauma, can have. What Happened to You is Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's new book. So I recommend that one as well. And I always, because we always say, well, we should be asking what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. And I like that. I think we should still, I think it's a good thing to say and a good way to look at our practice. But I think the next question we need to ask ourselves is, do we need to know what happened to them? Because a lot of times, if you think about, imagine you're in a retail store and you see the, employee of the store being very rude to someone in front of you, and you happen to know that the person in front of you is autistic. And so we find ourselves needing to explain why that, that person A needed to be compassionate to the person in front of them. And we'll qualify it by saying, well, they're autistic, so you should really be more understanding, or you should be nicer, you should be kinder. And so I always caution outside of the professional sphere that what happened to you, because I don't know that we always need to know what's happened to everyone to extend that level of understanding and that level of compassion to someone. I do a training for public spaces called Creating a Culture of Caring, and it's based on trauma-informed community development. And I just a couple years ago, right before the pandemic, I did it with our entire library system here in Athens County. And they did a 2-part seminar with me. But there's such this intensity around, oh gosh, well, you never know when the person in front of you might have had the worst day of their lives, or, you know, when the person in front of you is just diagnosed with cancer, or the person in front of you has this and this and this. And we actually don't need to know any of those things. And we can extend compassion and extend understanding without necessarily knowing those things. And I always like to flip it as well. I said, that person might be having the best day of their lives and you're going to ruin it. So let's not ruin it. So sorry, that was a little bit of an aside, but I think sometimes that what happened to you language, when I see it being circulated on social media, worries me a little bit, because the intention here is in our work with teens, or in our work with people who have experienced trauma, is to detach what happened to them from a part of their innate identity. And so just as a little aside, you guys all got to see a little bit of some of what bugs me. Another book, The Boy Who Was Race's Dog. We actually did this in our CASA book club a couple years ago, and that's another one by Bruce Perry. And then Healing Trauma is more from a clinical perspective, but it offers a lot of really great insights. And it kind of talks about that emotional, spiritual, and physical care, and how those are kind of interconnected. But I'd love to hear if any of you have, throughout the series, or just have come across a book or an article, if you would be interested in sharing, so we can kind of spread that around with everyone. Has anyone else come across anything really good lately? And if you can't think of it right now, the Google Classroom will stay open, so you're welcome to add more things in there as well. And I think I must have added about a dozen different various resources and articles and things on Google Classroom, just for your future reference. Julie shared Beyond Behaviors, if you look in the chat, as a book recommendation. That's a book, right, Julie? Yeah, as a book recommendation.
Yeah, it's using brain science and compassion to understand and solve children's behavioral challenges.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we just ordered a few new books for folks who are local to Athens, for our, we kind of have that lending library in our office. And we've had a lot of CASAs asking questions about attachment. So we've ordered a lot of books on attachment disruptions and things like that. I haven't had the chance to look through all of them myself, so I can't give any specific recommendations, but if you're in Athens County volunteer, feel free to stop and shop off of our bookshelf if you ever need to. Or if you come across something really great, we'll order it and add it into our library. Great. So a few final things. We're going to wrap up early today. Under the classwork tab on Google Classroom, that's that middle tab, you'll see a section called Wrap Up and Resources. I think I put that section at the top. But if you have any outstanding makeup assignments, those are all due on September 13th by noon. So they're all posted in there in the week that you missed. So if you missed week 10, you can go to week 10's heading and find the recording. And then usually there's a couple questions that you just answer, or maybe upload. If it's something where you're writing down answers to something, you can take a screenshot and upload that there. Frankie, I can leave the classroom open indefinitely. Like I have no limit to close it. So it can stay open indefinitely. I would just recommend, if there's anything that you're welcome to download anything out of there if you want to. And I'll post all the slides as well. I'll post those later today in that general one, just in case there's a slide or a graphic that you really liked that you want to use later on. But yeah, it'll just stay open indefinitely. Or I guess as long as Google Classroom exists and they let us keep it open. But I know we have our old pre-services open from 3 or 4 years ago, still in there. So makeup assignments due September 13th. There's a training evaluation posted in this section on Google Classroom. That's due September 14th at 12. I do really appreciate your feedback. We really try to listen to the feedback that we get when we're planning future trainings, and even just future topics. We use those to get ideas about future training topics, what kind of trainers or speakers you want to hear from. And then the very next day, on September 15th, I'll be emailing your training certificates out. And there is no, I'm not able to give partial credit. So if you attended 11 out of 12 sessions and you didn't do the makeup, it's 0 hours. So you have to do the makeups because it's either all 12 hours or no hours. I can't give partial credit for the training. But I think I tagged anyone who had outstanding makeup work done or that needed done. And then finally, I know a lot of you already know this, but we have a Facebook group, and it's you can find it on Facebook. It's a private, but it's not confidential. It's just a private group. So we don't post case information there, but it's called SE. If you search SEO CASA, it'll come up, and we share upcoming trainings, interesting books, articles, just things we come across, information about CASA there. So you're all welcome to join that. You don't have to be in Southeastern Ohio. That's just how it started. But it's open to any CASA volunteer or CASA staff member. And that is all I had. Any lingering questions, comments, remarks before we sign off about 25 minutes early?
Jenny, I want to thank you for this class. It's been a wonderful experience. And thank you to my fellow classmates for participating, and the breakout rooms were so enriching.
But thank you for taking the time to say that, Frankie. I appreciate that feedback. And I agree. I appreciate everyone as well for participating so much.
I agree with Frankie. You did a great job.
Thank you. Well, I hope to bump into some of you in real life in the future, particularly those of you that live in Athens. I feel like I haven't seen anyone forever. So I hope to bump into you all in real life sometime down the road. But definitely check out the Facebook group. And of course, our website, athenscasa.org, will be posting future training opportunities on there. And I hope everyone enjoys the last few weeks of summertime. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jenny.